First and foremost, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Saxon Stahl. I am a current student here at Columbia School of Professional Studies and a part of the inaugural cohort of the Political Analytics program. I have been given the honor of introducing our panel discussion today, How to Spend $20 Billion, Media Strategy and Data Analytics. Without further ado, I will be introducing our moderator for this panel. Please give a round of applause for Dr. Doug Usher. Doug Usher is a partner at Forbes Tate Partners and is a strategic advisor to the Political Analytics program. He has spent the last 2 decades building insights that have helped change the strategic trajectory of major corporations, industry associations, and political campaigns. Combining deep expertise in opinion research, data analysis, and analytics with years of experience navigating the intersection between business goals and the political, policy, and regulatory spheres. Doug has lectured widely, published in the popular press, and appeared on most cable news networks for his analysis of trends in public opinions and politics. He holds a BA from the University of Michigan and an MA and PhD from Cornell University in Government and Research Methodology, where he was lucky enough to meet our residential program director, Professor Gregory Wara. Now, before I hand it off to Dr. Usher, I will be going around in the audience to collect flashcards if you have any questions for this panel discussion. This mic is not working the best, but regardless, I will be going around. So if you have any questions, just go like this with your flashcard, and I'll be sure to collect them shortly for our Q&A portion of this panel. And without further ado, I will hand it off to our panelists.
Thank you, Saxon. Welcome, everybody. Thank you to the School of Professional Studies. Thank you to the amazing support of the folks that organized this. For those of us who are coming from Washington, even coming from right around the corner, this kind of conference looks amazing, and it's not something that we usually get to see. We usually sit in a riser with like 6 people in an audience, and we don't get breakfast and lunch. So hats off to the organizers of this. This has really been terrific. So today's panel that I'm going to be moderating is called How to Spend $20 Billion, Media Strategy and Analytics. I originally called it How to Waste $20 billion, but that didn't quite get through our little mini committee of panel titles. We're lucky to have a real august group of folks with us today, talking about the intersection of data analytics and how you're going to spend that $20 billion, which, by the way, may be a modest estimate the way things are going right now. So I'll start to my left, Lee Carosi Dunn. She spent her career at the intersection of technology and politics. Currently, she's in addition to her work at Google, which I'll talk about in a minute, she's doing a lot of consulting and volunteer work for campaigns in Northern Virginia, as well as helping out with Nikki Haley in her potentially successful still, but now suspended campaign. She spent over 12 years at Google, where she headed up outreach, government relations, and policy for Google Cloud North America. But I think important for this panel is that she's helped with the international elections outreach around Google's advertising, civic security, and advertising products. She's led the U.S. Political campaign sales as well, and amazingly, has helped Google and YouTube become one of the premier places for advertising for politics, as well as just about everything else you might need for your house. Prior to Google, she spent 10 years working for Senator John McCain as GC, and she also worked on his 2008 presidential campaign. She graduated from law school at Catholic University and has her undergraduate degree from Vanderbilt. Next to her is Kate Welsh, who is a vice president at Buying Time. She, for the last 15 years, has had a front seat to the evolution of political media buys and the analytical tools used to create and run the most efficient and effective campaigns possible. Basically, at the end of campaigns, people are calling her saying, I've got another $10 million. What can I do with it? And it's her job to figure out a way to spend it. She specializes in media planning and buying on behalf of candidates, issues, and advocacy campaigns. planned and executed, as I said, multi-million-dollar campaigns. Multi-million doesn't even sound that great anymore. Right? If you're not spending $1 billion, you're not a real campaign. And working across multiple media platforms and helping them get the right media mix, which we'll talk about a bit. And whether it's an assembly district all the way up to a national presidential campaign, if you need to buy media, Kate's your person to help with that. She's now in charge of the digital department, which, as you can imagine, is a growing part of the advertising sphere. She's really from Reading, Pennsylvania. She has a BA from Elizabethtown College in Business Administration and a master's in hard knocks of politics.
I love that.
Steve McAlpine is an entrepreneur and founder of INTRVL. He wears the CEO. He spent his career determining the impact of interventions like advertisements and promotions on outcomes, which I think is what we're all trying to figure out here. Most recently, he's been quantifying the impact of political and issue advertisements in the 2022 and 2020 political election cycles, the impact of property value on title flooding due to sea level rise, and the impact of political advertising on ballot preferences. So again, what's interesting about this type of work is it crosses all kinds of different spheres. Just real quick, he uses all kinds of analytic techniques, includes some form of regression, spatial components, variable reduction, regularization techniques, and Bayesian methods. So for all the data heads in you, he's definitely someone to answer questions. A BA from UVA and a master's degree from a small university on the Upper West Side. Okay, so we're going to start with the questions now, and I'm going to take moderator purview and try to keep you guys going. So John Wanamaker, the famous merchant from Philadelphia, famously said, "Half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is, I don't know which half." You might change that today to say 98% of what we spend on political advertising is wasted. We just don't know what 98%. Given how much is plowed, when you've got an election in South Carolina where people are spending $150 million to move the needle by about 1 point against Lindsey Graham, or spending almost as much money in Kentucky against Mitch McConnell. So the question for you is, what do you think? Is that's my supposition, is that now the real effectiveness might just be 2%? But what do you think? To what extent is advertising producing results the campaigns want, and how and to what extent does data help inform that? So I'll start with you, Lee.
Oh, geez. When you win a campaign, your advertising was perfect, right? You were spot on, and you end with $0 in the bank, and but I think it's so hard to calculate, right? So what I would say is, again, it goes back to data, which is why this program's great. If I can showcase to the candidate that there are ads that are persuading voters to move, no matter the cost, then I can show how that voter, and a lot of times with the digital platforms more than ever before, I can show you where this voter started off undecided, came closer, and then what I can tell is through clicks or maybe a donation or maybe even a voter registration, we moved that voter all the way. And so I think it's the analytics that is going to prove whether the data, the advertising was actually effective. So I think that's why this program would be really helpful, because there's a lot of money wasted in advertising in politics. We throw a lot at the wall. I was just talking to Doug earlier about, and y'all can probably relate to this too, so much of advertising, especially in the past when we didn't have such intricate and detailed data analytics from online platforms, when we were going with broadcast, Nielsen, was emotion. I can't tell you, I'm probably considered in the modern era of political advertising, and that's still not saying much because, I still feel old in this era, but I can't tell you how many times the candidate has come to me and said, my mom's not seeing me on television. We're doing it all wrong. And it's like, well, if you have to persuade your mother, we're all in trouble here, right? But the point is like, that's an emotional reaction that has nothing to do with data, and then he, talks about the fact that his mother only watches channel, 4 local news at 4 p.m. And it's like, oh my gosh, So I think I think a lot of money is wasted on emotional advertising in politics in a way that we don't see it in corporate. And I can talk a little bit more about that when we get to the numbers. But I think with the new platforms, with streaming, with connected TV, Instagram, YouTube, all of these, being able to show that evolution of a voter. But to your point, sometimes it's truly 10,000, 5,000. And ask Mike Bloomberg what he spent on per voter, and he could put each of his voters through 4 years of Columbia for the amount he spent to get them there. But so it's really it's become more and more fascinating. So I agree with Wanamaker, but I agree it's getting better over time, is what I suppose.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with the 98% waste, especially when you don't win, right? Like that's the hardest part. You can say, if you have the win to show for it, that's your advertising worked, right? It's tough though because it's black and white. Like we win or lose, that's the results. That's what we're working for. We're working for that towards that win. But each campaign is really unique, down from the budgeting to the targeting. Every campaign is going to have a different strategy, and there's, like you were saying, there's so many different platforms out there to weed through, which is where the data comes into play. So we use data all the time. To determine, we can see where our voters are, where they're likely to be. We can see how many times we should be reaching them with a message, when we should be reaching them with a message. And then from there, we take that information and build out our campaign strategy. But in addition to the viewership information and data that we have available to us, competitive analytics is a whole other ballgame for political spending as well, because we have... We partner with a company that just collects that information. And so we look at reports on a daily basis of political spending, what platforms people are spending it on, our opponents, our friendlies, everything. And that we can use all the viewership data we want to build out a campaign strategy. And then it might get thrown out the window when our opponent goes up 2 weeks beforehand, before we expected them to.
Now that data is more available because it's on transparency reports, so you can see what platforms.
On everything but digital.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more technology being developed too to track that information on platforms that aren't public or required to publicly disclose spending and other campaign information. So this partner in particular is working on technology with ACR data to collect impressions off of those platforms, so you can see at least where those campaigns are running too. So between the viewership data and the competitive analytics, there's a lot to weed through to build a campaign strategy.
Steve, how about for you? How do you determine what's wasted, what's useful, how do you optimize, et cetera?
Well, yeah, I really love this question because first off, that quote I used to pitch INTRVL about John Wanamaker, that half that is wasted but not knowing which. I mean, there's obvious waste that occurs when you are building a media plan and 90% of your buy is on linear TV, but only half of your audience is reachable there. That's obvious. Other obvious waste is if you're trying to do voter persuasion and mobilization and you're still speaking to people who've already voted in earlier vote states, obvious waste. But beyond that is when it gets a lot more difficult because the metrics that people are using and are readily available most times to understand, is my program even working? Are often GRPs, impressions, clicks, and views, which what you really want to know, or am I changing hearts and minds? And am I actually likely to change a behavior at the end of the day? Who are we going to vote for? Who are they going to vote for? And will they vote or not? And so where we've been really focused is finding ways to collect the actual data, the outcome data, while media campaigns are running. So we run regular surveys that are determining likelihood states and combine that with media targeting information. This is taking some of the best practices from commercial analytics. Media mix modeling is one of the methods where you can see we put all these different channels out here, all this dosage of content, of messaging. We can determine the relationship between the amount of content you put out and the change in stated likelihood. And then after an election, or even with early vote data that comes in, you can use each of those to see, are we mobilizing people with the early vote feeds, with surveys that you're running continuously? Are we changing hearts and minds while the campaigns are running? So I think there's just a huge measurement problem. Why so much waste happens? Because it's so hard to know the thing you actually want to know. Are we changing hearts and minds while you're running programs and can make decisions about it? And so we focus on this all the time, but totally here, this is just a status. It is not an easy thing to get. It takes a lot of money and the right skills and the right methodologies to have any shot at determining that 1 to 2% difference you can actually make. It's just so tiny. It just takes a lot of data and the right methods in order to do so.
Yeah, so you bring up, you anticipate on my next question, which is there's a lot of discussion about the switch from linear TV advertising, just so we're all on the same page. That's when it's on TV and you watch it on 5 p.m. on the local news and you get a news adjacency ad, versus over the top, which is streaming, programmatic, which is where they follow you. So you say to your spouse, I'd like to buy a jigsaw, and then all of a sudden you get ads for jigsaw all over the place, and social. So what are the best data-informed ways to choose the mix across different channels? And I'll start with you, Kate, again, because I keep pointing to this. You'll get flooded with money in August, September, October. How do you go back to them and say, I'd like to build it across these platforms?
Yeah, we use a combination of qualitative and quantitative data constantly. We use the survey data from qualitative information like Scarborough to actually identify media habits. You can go down the geography. So when we are looking at specific districts, that's really helpful information. And then we also use quantitative data from companies like Nielsen and Nielsen and Comscore, who are actually collecting that data. So we constantly review information and the data that they're providing us down to the districts that we're looking at, the markets that we're looking at to make those decisions. But then internally, we've come up with a formula to distinguish and compare CPMs across all of these mediums
CPM?
too. Yeah. So
Say what that is.
sorry. Cost per 1,000 impressions. Yeah, so in their impressions across any medium, but then usually, like you were saying, there's the ratings that you're looking at or the GRPs, and so we created a formula to compare all of those CPMs across all mediums to get an actual true CPM for our voter. So how much is it going to cost to get our voters if we're buying cable? How much is that going to cost if we do it on broadcast? And similar for digital as well.
Okay, great. Now, Lee, your small company is a bit of a recipient of this transition to away from linear and onto other platforms. Tell us a bit about what you've seen in terms of the change and how you both sell to clients but also demonstrate to clients the power of the world of Google, whether it's YouTube search, et cetera.
Well, I'd start with one thing, like Kate said. First thing we tell any advertiser, political, commercial, go where the audience is. So where's your audience? Are you, and once you figure out where your audience is, you'll know, and what they're watching and what they're doing, you'll know what medium or, I would contend that broadcast is still having its moment. We had the highest rated Super Bowl ever. You can say thanks Taylor Swift, but there could be other factors at play. We had the highest rated Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade on broadcast. Like, what? I don't, but I loved it, so broadcast still has its moment. It has huge tentpole moments, and I guess it's I'm going to get this wrong. It's either every 8 years, I think, that we'll have an election and the Olympics together. So these candidates this year have huge tentpole moments. We had the Super Bowl. We're having March Madness. We're going into the Olympics for the summer, and they should be leaning into those tentpole moments. And a lot of those tentpole moments will actually be on broadcast. I would lend that a lot of the audience can still be found there. For linear TV, if you describe linear TV as TV on a wall, I would contend that YouTube, we're seeing more and more people watch YouTube on a TV. We have over, I think it's over, I can't remember the stat, but it's the amount of hours that are watched. So we're seeing it's not the majority of time, but it's getting there. And I would say over the next 2 or 3 years, majority of people will be watching YouTube on TV in addition. But also what we see is that even when people are watching a TV on their wall, it's multimodal, right? They're scrolling on their phone, sometimes on Google, because they see an ad for a razor and they want to see, how much is that? Where can I buy it? And then they're, getting served ads from other platforms because of the way programmatic advertising works. And then the streaming is a big area. I'm an old broadcast and cable and telephone company attorney that I started off in my career, so it pains me to say it, but I think cable is dead in 10 or 20 years. I just think they missed their moment where they could have been the streamers, and some of them are, some of the networks on Hulu, stuff like Peacock's trying to become a thing. And so we'll see where this goes, but the streamed content, someday we're not going to be saying whether it's, connected TV is going to be everything from YouTube to Instagram Reels to streaming and broadcast. So it'll be interesting, but that's how I look at the audience when we're talking to advertisers.
Fantastic. And back to you, Steve. That's an important question that I have is, Are we missing the mark when we talk about CPMs and costs per impression when we're making those channel selections? And do we sometimes get into a trap where we are metricing our way out of being successful?
Yeah, it's a great question because the quality of the impression is a big factor in this. Like highly viewable impressions, like watching YouTube, where people are sitting there desiring to watch a video. They really want to watch video content versus like open web inventory, where somebody's scrolling on a website and a video just kind of randomly shows up in a bottom location. That random bottom location, it's going to be cheaper. It's going to have a lower CPM more likely than a YouTube ad or connected television ad or linear TV, for instance, but it may not be better. So it could be like boiling things down to a cost per. We regularly try to just boil it down to what did you spend by channel, and then what did you get in terms of changed outcomes, in terms of ballot initiative support or changing that candidate support, or even like mobilization intent. So just turning it into a cost per for your outcome, with the outcome being the thing you really want. That makes it easy to compare channels apples to apples instead of apples to oranges when you're doing your different CPM looks. Just speaking of YouTube, I was at Mike Bloomberg's political tech firm Hawkfish for that crazy experiment, and I think there was $1 million a day getting spent on YouTube, and so all the brand lift survey data coming in, but it works really well. We saw that was the greatest experiment in political advertising I think I've ever seen, with the most data-rich environments I've ever been a part of, and it works. Debate stages can make different things happen than paid media, but
it was the most data-driven campaign we'd ever seen.
Yeah, it was. I'm still very grateful for for being involved in that and what Google was able to provide just in terms of like quality inventory. So, long story short, that we've looked at linear TV versus open web versus YouTube and premium video, and while the CPMs are higher for premium video versus open web, we've seen often greater cost efficiencies. So that's at the end of the day, boil it down to a cost per. CPMs are helpful, but they're not the end of the day what you really need to optimize for.
Right, so the Bloomberg is always interesting because now he's seen as the guy who wasted all that money, and I worked against him in his 2001 election, and then he was looked at the guy who spent all the money and was brilliant. So things change pretty quickly based on 3 to 4 percentage points each way. How well can you truly micro-target in advertising spending, right? Everyone will come up and say, I've got the greatest slice of left-handed, liberal, conservative, Trump-supporting rifle owners who love the environment, and I'm going to get them for you. Can you do that? How do you do that? Or is it just a bit of a needle in a haystack exercise designed to make some consultants money?
So when I was working on 2015 campaigns, it was all about micro-targeting, and it was all about matching content to that micro-targeting. If your candidate loved to ride motorcycles, then we're gonna get your candidate on a motorcycle, and we're gonna play that video in front of every motorcycle YouTube channel out there, and we're gonna make every motorcycle lover in, Iowa love the candidate. A lot of things have moved away since then. One is the removal of cookies, or the depreciation of cookies, which are the tracking devices. The other is that it just became really expensive, and it became really not efficient. And what we found more is going after wider swaths of audience. You get a better, we think sometimes, I think a better rate for your candidate, and you get better efficiency. Let's say, you might not, to use one in the commercial world, I might be trying to look for Chobani yogurt buyers, but in reality, what I should be looking for is people who are interested in dairy and protein, So not being so narrow that I remove the idea that I can see all these other audiences out there. And that's really one of the things that we found from the 2016 to the 2020 campaigns that people really moved away from, is this extreme micro-targeting. First of all, it was heavily criticized by Congress and the press, and this is how Trump won, and anybody, we can all argue about that. I can see your wheels already spinning. but I just think we've moved away from that in a positive way, and I think it's because of data. But.
Kate, how about for you? So when the clients come and they say, okay, the campaign wants to reach this narrow slice, here's a bunch of dollars, what do you say to them?
I say, do you have more money that we can broaden this a little bit more?
Your bosses will be very happy to
Right.
hear that. And what do you then do?
Yeah, and in some cases, right, when we are dealing with a slimmer budget, we might have to micro-target, right? That you might just have to. That's what your campaign has available. But if it's not, I mean, we often advise them to just go more broad. I mean, like they point to as a success case for micro-targeting was 2008, Obama. You know, turnout in a lot of key states they attributed to micro-targeting. So we've seen it where it is said to have worked, right? He won. He can say that it worked.
Yeah.
But that said, it's really hard because to Lee's point too, you have to have an infrastructure to be able to do micro-targeting well. And in a lot of cases, you just don't have it. You're spending a lot of money on different kinds of creative, a multitude of them to run across a multitude of audiences. And it's just an infrastructure that like a lot of campaigns don't have. But we usually, if we can, and if the polling suggests that we can, we'll advise them to go more broad.
How about for you, Steve? Tell me, do you believe in it? Do you think it works? Do you and when do you caution clients about it, and when do you talk about it a lot? And can you actually get it done?
Yeah, I think there are like necessary conditions in which it makes sense to do micro-targeting or just be really specific. The program has to be big enough to like have the options to make enough creatives if you're doing creative assets for different segment groups. On just the targeting side, you have to have a like big enough universe to then narrow down in the first place. Like a state Senate race may not need to do micro-targeting because they're talking to everybody. So, but a Senate race could benefit a lot more from that because you do want to just talk to a segment of the audience. And then there's how will you actually distribute the content? Like if you're only on linear TV, then how you're going to buy DMAs, and so what's really micro-targeting that much of? But if you're like highly digital and you can do micro segments, or you even have mail programs, and you even know where to canvas and have like scripts for different folks, now you're back in the world where you can be efficient. So if it's big enough programs that have the like production budgets or the operational capability, they benefit greatly from it. We've done a number of studies where we basically can rank every potential audience from best, better, good, and then definitely don't talk to at all, and actually run experiments, whether mobilization experiments, persuasion experiments, not all electoral, sometimes on issues, and then just seeing the correlation between our predictions for like how much it should work and not. And those come from either two ways. It's like openness at the start of the campaign, so collect a lot of fresh data right before a program begins to see like right at that point in time who has the greatest possibility for persuasion. So we can rank people by like openness. And we've seen then when you run program, the more open somebody was, the more movement. And then the other way we've done it is like measure a past program and then use that to predict who will respond to a future one. And the same thing, best, better, good. It's in the same result, more impact from the top of the file versus the next part, the next. So it can work, but it doesn't always fit a program given your budget, your targeting, how much time you have, your asset capabilities. So and then your distribution plan at the end of the day.
Okay, let's think about the program for a little bit. Just a quick, pitch here. Obviously, this is brought together by the master's program in political analytics. The applications are still open for those who are undergrads and those who have children who might be sitting on the couch at home. Great way for them to think about a job. Let me ask each of you, in your own work and the people you hire, how are the skills we're talking about today and the skills from the program applicable and something you look for as someone who brings in people to do their jobs? I'll start with you, Kate.
Sure. A lot of the skills that we look for and we find applicable every day across campaigns are just the ability to multitask, being able to react very quickly. Communication is big because a lot of the times we're translating a lot of this data to our clients, and not only just the data, but then the new partnerships that we have with other companies to help guide us through that. We're doing a lot of translating. But something else that we find helpful too is the human side of data, right? So like the behavioral psychology and sociology and things like that. Because kind of to the last panel's points, the data is only as good as as it is if it's accurate, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that side of it too that really gets into the weeds, which is really helpful.
Excellent. Lee, how about for you? What's going on at Google?
I would say, we're a company that's data-driven. That's how we make our decisions. So we always look to hire people who want to be in an environment where decisions are data-driven. So I think this program's great for that. I would say if you're looking to do data analytics and advertising, get your certification on YouTube, on Google Ads or Facebook, or go for some of the platforms and start playing around with it and having some fun. Run a brand lift. You know, brand lift. Maybe you can describe it better than me, but and from an analytics standpoint. But it's really just doing A/B comparison of creative. Like, you know, go have some fun with your peers. Have people film an ad for the cheeseburger in the cafeteria, in one way and another way, and start seeing what gets the most lift, and just put some silly dollars behind it for fun. And but that's how I think if you want to do advertising analytics, just start getting used to how the campaigns and advertisers are looking at these platforms for analytics and have some fun with it. But it's really important.
Excellent. You're CEO. You've got to keep your workforce going. It can be cyclical. When you invest in a new person, it's a risk.
Yeah.
You have a small company. What are you looking for in talent as you bring people in to make sure not only that they'll help your business, but also be really good at what they do and advance in their career?
Yeah, I think it's just intellectual curiosity is just a part of this. These are hard problems we're trying to solve. We're all approaching from different backgrounds here, and it's all necessary because there's just the methodologies and the models, and in a vacuum they do nothing. They have to be applied. They have to meet programs, like whether it's a candidate or a PAC or a nonprofit or even a corporate affairs program, has to meet them where they are. So you have to really understand and be able to translate goals to of programs who have their own background and understanding to when I'm looking at data to data outputs that are actionable, or usable. So at the end of the day, it has to be usable and understandable in order for it to have impact. And so look for folks who can see both sides. Who get the research and the methodologies, but also get how it would be utilized and how to explain it in a way that is the full picture that is necessary for anything that's in the real world, and particularly in the political realm too, just given how many things are involved, both personally, everyone brings some of themselves to the work, but more complications. It's not just selling products. There's hearts and minds. That's a whole other space.
Can I say one point on that? Just real fast, I was going to say, most campaign managers, and I assume both of you will agree with this, most campaign managers and most candidates are not mathematicians or data analysts. So it's not just understanding the data, but you kind of alluded to this, and you did too. So much of it's telling the story. And you have to tell the story with not just numbers. That, here are some voters that have these identities that you are not reaching, and here's why. And so, knowing the analytics, but being able to be creative and have your communication skills match the buying, the person who's ultimately in charge, is really important, because a lot of times it's not someone else who's steeped in data at all.
Right. And I think Professor Warrow at the beginning pointed out that data folks have a seat at the table now. They are really right there next to the campaign managers in the political world, but people who can't talk about data in a way that makes sense to other people quickly get shut out. That's, I think something that people miss a lot when they think about analytics is if you can't communicate it, and just to use a PowerPoint example, if you can't communicate it in one slide that can be passed around that has data at its bottom but a story at the top, it's not worth anything. Another question, and then we'll go, please, if you have cards and you want to pass them around or pass them up, please do. And if you need a card, also raise your hand. Okay, it's the end of the campaign. It's September, it's October 1, and there's some sort of campaign shock. Money starts flooding in. I think about South Dakota or North Dakota, where Heidi Heitkamp, senator, voted against the Kavanaugh nomination back in 2018, and then was flooded with $40 million. You can't spend $40 million in South Dakota without actually buying in North Dakota without buying property, right? So for all of you in your world, how do you advise clients as this money floods in at the end? And I'll just come this way to finish with Lee. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, late money. What to do with it? Never have enough time to do the best possible use of that fund. If you had it 3 months earlier, everything would have been more efficient. But we recommend always have a strategy that's kind of tiered. So where should you put your next dollar? What's the most efficient use of your next dollar? And then exhaust that to then figure out your next best strategy. Exhaust that. That can mean audiences. I talked about best, better, good audiences. It can mean channels. At certain points, maybe you do need to just go out in the field more and send another direct mailer because it doesn't make sense to spend $1 more on digital. So, or even within digital, there's all these different strategies or targeting. You can do lists, you can do zips, you can do whole DMAs. they're all just degrees of precision, and you just and further away from what you really want to do, and just be prepared to just keep moving to your next best. And the earlier you do that, when the big money comes, which it always does, really too late, you at least know where to go next.
Yeah, and we kind of similarly have a checklist of sorts that we would work through is, first off, look at the competitive report. Is our opponent somewhere where we're not? Are there platforms that they're on that we're not, that we are able to see? And then from there too, if we're already on TV, but we might not be buying, like the smaller Me TVs or the Ion TVs, like is there a benefit to that reach on those stations? And then similarly, if it is there's a strong Spanish language TV stations that we're not already including in our plan. Like, is there a benefit from that exposure as well? Last usually is considered the out of home, the billboards and the plane banners. Is there a way to be creative with some out of home messaging that can also be turned around that quickly, because that doesn't move as fast unless it's a digital board. But that said, there's actually this past week, one of the options was, so there's already $150 million spent in the Montana Senate race. What they decided to do with the money that they already have.
Let's just stop for a second. Just so we're all clear. It is Montana's.
Yes.
And $150 million has been spent already.
Yes.
It is March.
Yes.
Right?
And so they're at that threshold of what do we do with this money, and it's already so soon. They're buying North Dakota markets to cover Montana markets and Montana households. So they're already at that level where that's what another thing you'd consider is, what other households can I reach by just buying broadcast in another close fringe market? If we've exhausted all of those things, then we do look to the campaign manager to say, like, how can this money be beneficial to the ground game? That's what we would kind of suggest then too.
No, to be creative and buy a TV station.
Yeah. Yes. There you go.
No, I'd say everything they did, I would turn. I mean, then you can just have fun, right?
Yeah.
So you can throw the best campaign event ever at the best venue ever, versus, serving like water, you get to serve soda, or beer and wine, and then, voters seem to be a little bit more friendly to you.
Yeah.
But, we saw this even, I remember in the Jeb Bush campaign in 2015, is they had so much money. And I remember we were trying to pitch them on YouTube and the reach of YouTube. Meanwhile, they were paying to have airplane banners flown around Trump's, rallies. Totally no trackability, no accountability, but they got a lot of earned press from it. So like, what kind of stunts can we do that get earned press and also nobody really buys yard signs anymore because there's no return on investment, there's no trackability. And so if I had just silly money, I'd start handing out yard signs. I mean,
I thought you were going to say cash.
well, that's illegal, but I'm a lawyer. But the yard sign, it's really funny. I mean, old school political campaign managers are like really upset about the lack of yard signs, and so are vanity candidates, frankly. But it's true. There's no return on it. So if you have silly money, man, you could buy a yard signs. I mean, I remember, flying into Des Moines during presidential years, and the whole driveway of the airport would be just lined with every sign, and there's one massive billboard when you get off the plane, when you drive out, and people would just like bid on trying to get that, and so that's where you could just start doing silly stuff that, no one can prove the return, but it's fun.
So quick follow-up question to that, and then we'll get questions from the audience. Trump spent significantly less than Hillary Clinton and won. Trump spent less than Joe Biden and lost. Trump seems to be headed towards spending less money than Biden this time. Here's a supposition. Above a certain threshold, the money doesn't matter anymore. Once you've reached a certain point in a Senate race and even a presidential race, the extra money you're lighting it on fire. What do you think about that? And we'll just go this way, and then we'll hit the questions. Lee.
100% agree. I mean, on both sides of the aisle, we've seen massive spending discrepancies between candidates. But at the end of the day, if the candidate's not likable, I can't advertise that candidate out of unlikability. It's just not going to happen. So
That's great.
I mean, yeah, advertising often takes the hit, right, if we lose, but there is the quality of candidate, there's the quality of the creative that all goes behind that as well. So it's tough because, I mean, one part of the Trump situation, too, is the free media that he gets, right? So that plays a role, too. While it's not paid advertising, and depending on how it's, being talked about, he's getting free airtime, like billions in the last in 2016 worth of free airtime. So depends on how the press covers it too. I think will be an interesting shift for this year too.
Okay. Before we finish, we've got 15 more minutes, so we're not finishing, but just if you leave, we have more tables available on the ground floor for lunch, just so you know. So don't scramble to grab a table. We have other tables. You can, of course, sit in your seats and do whatever you like. So quick message from the logistics side. Okay. I'll just look through these. Okay, how does a pivot in advertising to streaming and social media impact efficiency, right? And how do the messaging and target demographics? Okay, so let's start with that. How do you improve efficiency? And then I'll add a little caveat: is when does efficiency matter? Anyone can start.
It's probably you.
Well, it does depend on the campaign itself, right? So depending on who we're trying to reach, the efficiency comes with our target audience, who we're trying to reach and where they are, kind of blending all of that data together to find them. So ideally, we make it as efficient as possible, and that's a platform to do it. That's the platform where you're going to have the most efficient impressions because we know where they are, we know where they're watching. Whereas linear and other traditional mediums are a little bit harder to narrow down, and you end up having to buy a lot more to reach them just because of the coverage. So ideally, that's the most efficient medium is digital streaming.
Excellent. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I would just echo linear DMA targeted. You can get a demo, which is still an aggregation of shows that are likely to have those people on it, versus streaming can be sometimes one-to-one, or other times zip code and other demos, contextual, what's being shown, ACR, content recognition algorithms. It's just, you can be way more precise. And if you have the execution strategy to implement it, like the right buying partners, deploy a much better strategy and adapt much more rapidly. So I think it's just making things way more efficient. And most folks, when they create ads, they watch them and want to see the whole thing end to end. And sometimes it's really important that you catch the end, and streaming is now allowing you to make sure you have these 15s and 30s that are viewed the whole way through, non-skip inventory that previously wasn't available when you could buy just the open web. So it's making the programmatic, if programmatic's inclusive of CTV, OTT landscape, have much better, highly viewable content than ever before. So really advancing high quality video content.
Plus on linear TV, I don't know if the person went up and made themselves a sandwich, whereas online I can see that the person's engaging with the video. They're still an active watcher. They watch till the end. Mm-hmm. Whereas so the efficiency online just is so much better because of the data.
Right. Okay, different question here. I think a really good one, which is what proportion of spend is going towards changing minds and opinions, and how much is more focused on exciting the base and motivating turnout?
That's a great question.
Okay, you can start if you want to.
I just heard some people they don't like mobilization, they don't like persuasion, they say it's mobilization. It's just actually both are happening all the time simultaneously, and in a really polarized environment where folks you're pretty informed-ish about what's going on, and it's really like, well, do I like them just enough to vote, or do I not like them enough? It's not exactly like you're persuading them to take an action, which can be just voting or not. And most of our measurement projects, when we have really data-rich environments for doing so, which can mean we have a bunch of survey data before a program begins. We have survey data after. We look at the voter file after, and it all gets combined. What we see are really subtle things around like who actually is the one who's persuaded. It's often like energizing somebody who is kind of a regular voter, but was on the fence about like, will I support this candidate or will I take this action? It's a little bit of false dichotomy. Persuasion is really what's happening today, particularly when it's at top of the ticket type things, when it's high salience elections. You kind of have to do both, since folks already have a feeling about most of the candidates in that case.
Kate, how about you?
We actually mostly only deal with the persuasion side of it. Before it comes to us, I think that decision's usually made of how much it gets put towards the ground game and some of the mobilization goals.
But how about advertising that is designed to mobilize the base, right? What do you think about that, Lee?
I mean, if you have to excite the base, you're losing.
Okay.
So your candidate's already half lost. So I would say that's a problem. I mean, what we used to see is this curve, and you guys can, first you start with fundraising. And we get people who would come in and say, oh my gosh, I'm making 10x off my fundraising. Well, that's not necessarily good. That's bad. You should be, everything you should be plowing back in and growing, growing, growing. And then you move from fundraising to persuasion. And then lastly, it's get out the vote. But get out the vote, which might be coined mobilization, is really generally for us always been the smallest part of anyone's media budget. And frankly, it's usually that now with early voting, 4-week period. It's not throughout the campaign at all.
Right. I mean, and now you're getting advertising. So California has a primary where everybody runs at once. And the leading Democrat wanted to be sure that the second place finisher was a Republican. So then with the hope, Adam Schiff was the leader and wanted to make sure that Steve Garvey, the former Dodgers player who was the only Republican that was viable, would finish second, not with some of his opponents. So Adam Schiff ran negative ads against Steve Garvey because that encouraged Republicans to turn out. So he said, Steve Garvey is too conservative for California. You should vote against him. Republicans then turned out and voted for Steve Garvey because they are too conservative for California as well. So we're getting to the point where negative ads designed to persuade are actually done to mobilize, and it's just fascinating to watch. So we've talked about the importance of data storytelling. So I'm going to put you all on the spot right now, or whoever wrote this great question is putting you on the spot. What's the best example of this that you've seen, where you told a story from the data that maybe convinced someone to do something or to act in a different way by getting away from just the numbers, but ways in which you maybe told an anecdote that helped to tell the story you wanted to tell?
I'll go first. Just a lot of times it's telling the candidate that his or her spouse is better received online in an ad than them, but you tell it with data that, this person's face to camera testimonial, or sometimes it's telling the candidate anyone else but you is doing better with advertising. And honestly, even with great candidates, sometimes that's just the case. People like to hear other people that either look like them or sound like them or feel like their neighbor or feel like their family saying, I'm voting for this candidate because. And they like to hear people around them. So a lot of times we've had to find a way to make sure the data tells that story, because the candidate doesn't want to hear that he or she is not the best person face to camera. And that's where the data really is helpful to make that pitch of saying we want to pivot to all these other testimonials and all these others. Also, candidates fall in love with ads, really fall in love with ads and creative. This is where the brand lift, and so using that data to say, I know you love this ad, but America doesn't. I'll give you one example. We used to, there was a great ad. I loved it. I mean, I'm a Republican and I loved it. It was called Mirrors by Hillary Clinton, where she had girls brushing their hair and looking in the mirror and talking about what it was like to grow up as a woman. And when the data was done on that ad actually drove more voters to Donald Trump than Hillary. But supposedly the candidate loved that ad. And, so someone should have done a brand lift ahead of time because it misserved them.
Kate, how about for you when you are trying to convince a client, you maybe told a story that got a little bit outside of the data?
Yeah, so our stories end up being literally pointing to the data that we've pulled, because a lot of times we're trying to convince some of our clients who are maybe linear forward, linear first, to consider all of the platforms and bring more money onto the digital side. And so a lot of times we'll pull information and they'll say, hey, we want to put all of this on broadcast. And we'll say, okay, but here's what we're seeing across each of these platforms for your district. Here's how you're going to reach everyone. And this is the best use of your money. Could we consider this scenario where you kind of are branching out and getting everyone in all different platforms? So we often have to use the data to say and make our case for why maybe just one medium isn't the best way to go, and that we have this opportunity to reach more people in a different and broader way.
Steve, how about for you?
So when candidates or folks love a creative, that's an interesting situation, and the why they love it. I've used data storytelling that it's building on experience of a past client who was running something called creative pre-testing. It's different than measurement of programs in the wild infield, it's called, where basically you take a creative, you have a survey. In the same survey, you can show the creative to a person and ask them questions afterwards. It's a way to basically see with high signal which ones are better, which creators are better than others, but it doesn't tell you what happens when you go out in the wild. And so I had a client who loved an ad, a 60-second ad. He said that everybody who saw it in focus groups and creative testing, like in the focus group, they'd cry because it really connected with them so much. But then they were putting the 60-second ad that when people were forced to watch it, would cry and would test high, up on Facebook, and then people just scroll right past it. So it doesn't matter really if the testing doesn't match where you actually distribute. And so a story of, yes, they were crying when they were forced to watch it, but they just scrolled right past on Facebook. That's a common way I explain the difference between creative pre-testing or focus groups and what actually happens when you run a real program and you're trying to see the impact. It matters where you're running it and if people stick around and see it.
Or someone who does focus groups, I'd say, if you could afford 1 million focus groups,
Yeah.
you could definitely win this race.
That's right. And in that focus group, you can persuade every person one by one.
Exactly, and now they almost can. So let's talk a little bit about small dollar donors. A little bit outside of your expertise, but certainly you are the recipient of the largesse from small dollar donors. First of all, what's the value of them when Trump and Biden are already the nominees? And why do they or should they keep giving?
I often get this question from my family in Pennsylvania. They're like, where can I put my money? What races are, really important across the country? And in the presidential, it's a different kind of scale, right? They have a lot of money. They're getting money from all over. But then I just usually end up guiding people to their local state legislatures, like the smaller races that don't have as much backing behind them. So that's usually my advice, because especially in these bigger campaigns, the more money they have, the more the costs drive up, and so it's just getting lost. Whereas these little, smaller campaigns can really benefit from it.
Like,
I'd agree 100%. You might think $25 is not much, but it means a lot to a small city council member, state legislature, even a congressional member.
Yep.
And it also gives them the statistic to say, 753, donors under $25 in my district supported my campaign. And it's a really powerful, most people don't give to campaigns. So it is important, it's metric. And then cultivating them from that $25 donation to maybe going door knocking or, going back to good old-fashioned yard signs, or the digital yard sign is posting logos for that candidate on your social media, because people are very persuaded by, oh, Kate really likes, Bob Smith for Senate, or Jane Smith for Senate, or that's worth a lot of money. That's worth more than the $25 that you gave if you start posting on your own social media and influencing your friends and neighbors.
so let me ask this, just as an add-on, that sort of to posit that in fact small dollar donors are making politics worse, because while the hope was small dollar donors would take the power away from some of the central folks that are the big money people and the party, grand poobahs, but actually it's now turned the power over to candidates and also incentivizes candidates to maybe not behave the best because they can end up making money and they raise money for themselves. They don't get money to the state legislature, and you end up raising $150 million to take on Mitch McConnell in an impossible race, as opposed to taking half that money and distributing it across state legislatures and House races. That's a open to argument. Steve, I know you were next one.
Yeah, so while most of the work I do isn't really on the fundraising side to see like how can we raise more. I can say what's making politics worse, or fundraising emails across the board. I think those are one of the worst things. I think they make folks feel alarmed and then disconnected with the 300x max, and even candidates they may get annoyed by. So at least from that side of where small dollar donors, or at least the process of trying to raise them and include them, can work against you and be bad for engaging folks. I think that I see that, but also misdirected resources. I totally agree. It doesn't make sense to raise tons of capital or funds for unwinnable races just because it's been nationalized, and it hurts at the end of the day. Engaging people is great, but at the detriment of emails that make people unhappy or money the wrong way, doesn't make too much sense.
Right, or even winnable races. You got the $150 million sitting in Montana, and look, probably going to win that with whoever is going to raise 50 would win or lose that. The next 100 isn't necessarily a difference, but if that money could be distributed across lower probability races on both the Democratic and Republican side, it might be better use of it, but that's going to go to $300 million before you know it. What do you think? The idea that small dollar donors have become hugely important and probably haven't had the impact or have they, that people had hoped?
Yeah, and I think kind of what you were saying too about the incentivize, like the congressmen who are raising that much money or the senators that are raising that much money are really, like, they're not incentivized to necessarily advocate for the others down the ballot, but they should be, right? Because there's still a lot of money to be had, and in most cases they have more than enough. So it's kind of on them to bring it back down and give focus to those local state legislature races that are also up, and kind of just refocus it. But why they're getting money, so.
Or the state party.
Yeah, and the state party. So it's kind of on them to redirect, I think, in some ways. And they might have to start considering that, given how much money is coming in each race.
And Lee, what do you think? So Nikki Haley raised a ton of money towards the end of her campaign.
She raised more February than Donald Trump did.
Right, and so the question is, and then the outcome wasn't any better. Right. Is that money was that more of a signal? Is that helpful? What do you think? Are we in a good place with that type of effort?
I don't know. I mean, I think people want to support a candidate that they think deserves to be in that office and that they want to see. And so that candidate's role is to use that money wisely to get them to there. But sometimes the campaign ends, and then you have this money. And so now you have to think about, how do I use that donor's money that matches that donor's intent? So are there candidates out there that resemble my crusade? So it's really a problem a lot of candidates actually don't have, but the ones that do, I hope, continue to be thoughtful so that small dollar donors don't go away and see this as a fleecing.
Okay, let's make the audience good consumers of data reporting on campaigns. I do a lot of advocacy work right now in my firm, and I see a lot of digital reporting, and I've never seen a report from digital that doesn't say that the performance is twice over industry norms. Okay, I don't know why it is, but somehow everything we do is so brilliant. It's at least double industry norms, and we've done work inside DC that had 300 million possible impressions. Well, Washington DC is not that big, so help us know what is puffery and what's real. I'll start with you, Lee, because you're at Google. You guys have the real stuff.
I would say what's real is something that might have started with ad-supported, but then goes viral in its own nature, and that's real. When you see people going beyond the paid to watch an ad, a lot more candidates are putting out 2 or 3 minute, sometimes 7-minute testimonials about why they're running or the state of their district or country. And when you see more and more people watching that's real. So look at the numbers. I mean, most of them, at least on the social media platforms, the numbers speak. Some of those numbers are obviously paid for with ad dollars, but you can tell when something's gone beyond the ad dollars.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, for the longevity of a campaign, I think matters too when you're seeing that kind of data. If it's been 2 weeks and you're seeing it's double industry standards or benchmarks, then that's great. But then what happens those next 2 weeks after that? Do you need to change a creative then if it does dip down? And you can it's nice because you can measure it for as long as that campaign is live.
Right.
So that's it's just monitoring it, but then also what we see on our side too is our pollsters will be able to tell us too if it's making any change on the ground as well. So we look to them as well as
Don't trust them. We've got a couple coming in the next panel, so you can see. What do you think?
Yeah, building on your pollsters on the outside, or you're looking for signals that aren't just in the paid environment. Kind of brings on the whole. You just can't be relying on your partners to grade their own homework. And maybe here at Columbia, everyone could do that and give you the right grade. But maybe otherwise, you want more partners. You can look at whatever your program is doing to ensure it. And as a third-party measurement vendor, we often play that role. So, speaking for myself, but it's still just important whether or not you need different strategies to assess how something's working. And if you own a website and you're your client or you're working for, and you own that website and you want traffic to it, that's already a metric just to see is a paid program and somebody else is running coming to an asset I own. So it's good to have a few of those levers because people can say 2x in a vacuum, so you want other outside ways to validate.
Excellent. So now let's take a moment to thank our terrific panel here.